Great. So thank you, Xiang. Take it away.
Okay, let me share my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yep, you can see it.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Xiang, and thanks for joining this Zoom call, and thanks Katie and the committee for inviting me to give this talk. I'm a third-year PhD in Utah's IMS, working with Catherine Wynne Edwards, Pete Stratton, and Elizabeth Sharwick. I want to thank them for their precious contribution to my research. So today's presentation is mainly about the second chapter of my PhD. So in this research, we choose the SOTS to start it. So SOTS stands for the Southern Ocean Time Series. It's set at the southwest of Tasmania here. Indian Ocean sector, it will represent the water property in the wide range of the Subantarctic Zone, so which is the region between the subtropical front and the subantarctic front, roughly between 46 to 6 degrees south. And it is a globally significant region for the uptake and the storage the anthropogenic CO2 from the atmosphere, because the subantarctic meltwater was formed and subducted here, just like the schematic show here. So this water mass will spread to the north in the deep ocean and manipulate the global carbon storage. Therefore, the thoughts just give a good shot to understand the carbon cycle and its drivers in the subantarctic zone. Well, before I start the research part, I would like to quickly introduce the SOTS mooring to people who are not familiar with it. So SOTS is owned by the Australian Integrated Marine Observing System, which is IMOS, and consists of two deep ocean mooring, just like these two schematics show here. They are both anchoring at about 4,500 meter deep, and the SOFS, which is the Southern Ocean Flux Station, it is a surface float with a bunch of sensors that record BGC parameters like PCO2, chlorophyll concentration, oxygen concentration, and the particularly backscatter at about 1 meter deep with hourly frequency. And this recent study by Elizabeth just nicely showed the high resolution record of it. So the SOFS was deployed in 2011, and despite some interruptions, it still provided good record of PCO2 in the past 10 years, and provided really nice year-round air-sea flux record. And it is the longest and the only open ocean mooring in the Southern Ocean at this time. And there is another sediment trap mooring next to the SOFS. So normally there are 3 sediment traps placed on 1,000, 2,000, and 3,800 meter deep. And they collected particles in every 2 weeks, and it started in late 90s. So one of the largest Southern Ocean time series, this mooring system just gives a great chance to understand the upper ocean carbon uptake and the deep ocean carbon sequestration in the subantarctic zone. So based on this awesome platform, we did 2 studies. One focused on the surface flux, and we found that the SOTS region is a net carbon sink from the atmosphere, and it is primarily driven by the biological activities with the magnitude of 6 millimole carbons per square meter per day. Therefore, in the second chapter, we just try to understand how many organic carbon can be exported and stored in the deep ocean. And these 2 studies are just published on JBC this year. So it's quite necessary to understand the particulate organic carbon, POC, export, since it is the most important food resources for the ecosystem in the Mesopelagic Ocean. And for the part that survived from remineralization, it will be sequestrated in the deep ocean for hundreds and thousands of years. So it has contributed a lot to storing the atmospheric CO2. And to better understand and quantify this carbon sequestration pathway will help us to better build the knowledge of global carbon budget. The organic carbon export is driven by multiple pathways, such as gravitational sinking or mixing pump or biological migrants. And this review paper by Philip have summarized them very well. But in our research, we are mainly focused on the first 3 pumps, which are the biological gravitational pump, the mixed layer pump, and the anti-subduction pump. So in this chapter, we have combined a group of BGC-Argo fleet observation and the sediment trap flux from the salt mooring to address these three key questions. First, to quantify the POC export by these three pumps and understand their seasonal variability. Then we try to compare the estimates to the sediment trap record to quantify the transfer efficiency at about 1,000 meter deep, and try to understand each pump's contribution to the deep sea carbon sequestration. Finally, we just try to explore the possibility to extrapolate this method to a large oceanic zone. Here, just a bit introduction of these three different carbon pumps. The biological gravitational pump, as the name suggests, it consists of large particulate large particle fast gravitational thinking, especially in the spring and summer when the primary productivity increase, it will become the key link to transport those large carbon to the depths. But more and more studies have raised the question about the discrepancy between the amount of carbon that is exported from the surface with the amount of carbon that the ecosystem requires in the mid-ocean. So more carbon pathways are needed to fill this gap. That's why those two carbon pumps come in. The mixed layer pump is mostly transport the small and slow sinking particles. During the winter deep mixing, the small particles that accumulated from last summer tends to be mixed in all over the place. And when the mixed layer showing, those particles were isolated to the depths. And this mechanism plays a very important role in the mid and high latitude regions because the deep winter mixing and the large seasonal changes. So, well, I think it's worth mentioning that we are using the maximum vertical gradient for each chlorophyll profile to define a term named the mixing layer. So it is a bit different from the normal mixed layer, but we believe it can better represent the depth range for the biological activity. And for the final one, when the eddy formed, the subduction event will deliver surface particle-rich water to the depths by the downwelling water transport. So it usually can transport the carbon to a very deep layer than the other two. And in this study, we use the negative anomalies of apparent oxygen utilization and the spice to detect the eddy subduction pump. So to do the calculation, we are quite relying on the BGC-Argo float that equipped with the sensor named particulate backscatter, which is BBP. So every time it dives, it will record a profile like this, and the number this number just represents how many particles are in this water column. And we later can use a linear coefficient to convert it to the POC concentration. So for each profile, we follow Nathan-Briggs method to partition it into three components. The black outlines are called spikes. They are represent large particles and used to calculate the gravitational pump. And the red part is the small, slow sinking particles, and they are used to calculate the mixed layer pump. And the blue part, just the background noisy. Then we apply this method to all the profiles in the source box. It defined based on an idea of a statistical funnel. So that means for a 1,000 meter deep sediment trap that placed on salts, it's very likely to collect materials that are exported from the surface within this box. And then we just follow Leo-Lacour's method to estimate the flux from these three carbon pumps and use those estimates to compare with the sediment trap record. So for the float estimates, we plot the gravitational pump in the first panel, the mixed layer pump in the middle, and the eddy subduction pump in the final one. The estimates are scattered as by the day of that year and the color coded for different floats. The gravitational pump is maximum from November to January, which with a magnitude of 400 milligram carbon per square meter per day. And this pump contributes most to the particle export by the strongest magnitude and the longest duration. And the mixed layer pump is no surprisingly peaks around September to October, which agrees well with the seasonal mixing layer showing. Despite the duration is a bit shorter, it still can contribute quite a lot to the carbon export. Then we argue that the BGC-Argo is not performing very well to capture the eddy subduction event because it's relatively low vertical and temporal resolution. And there are only 2 events observed and estimated in April 2018 and transport carbon around 150 milligram carbon per square meter per day. So after that, we compare it to the sediment trap flux. Here we term it as FPOC. So we add the climatology of FPOC to the first panel. It's clear to say that the seasonality of it is mainly followed that of the gravitational pump. So it may suggest that the gravitational pump is the most stable and the strongest pathway to export carbon and storage the carbon. For the mixed layer pump, it's particularly strong in the year of 2015, 2018, and 2021. So we pull out those FPOC record for those years to directly compare, and those time series are colored by the same color as the float in that year. So in second panel, there has been slightly increase for the FPOC in September, which is the same time of mixed layer pump actives. And it is slightly before the active time of gravitational pump, which started in November. So we believe this is a nice evidence that the mixed layer pump can contribute to the carbon sequestration. As for the eddy subduction pump, it is too rare to understand the annual contribution, but it looks like the eddy subduction pump contribute this little peak with the mixed layer pump together in 2018 April. So based on the previous results, we try to interpolate the POC export in the source neighborhood by averaging all the measurements in an annual cycle of 10-day bins. We create this uniform space climatology of carbon export flux, and we matched the closest FPOC to calculate the transfer efficiency and colored it in green. Since the eddy subduction pump is too sporadic to be considered as a regular pathway, so we decided to ignore it in this part. The gravitational pump and the mixed layer pump has contributed flux of 36 gram carbon per square meter per year in the source neighborhood. And from the sediment trap record, the FPOC at 1,000 meter is about 1.3 gram carbon per square meter per year. Then we can get an annual mean transfer efficiency is about 3.6%. So it is quite close to the mean estimates for the Southern Ocean, but it's a bit lower than the global mean. And we noticed that the transfer efficiency is a bit variable, especially from January to June. We believe that is because the quick changes in the float estimates. Although we didn't detect any obvious time lag from for the major events in the surface to the deep ocean, the mesopelagic ocean still acts as a buffer zone for mixing or repackaging the settling particles, and this process might not respond quickly to the upper ocean variability. Now we had a number of the organic carbon export in the upper ocean and the number of deep ocean sediment trap flux. But how do we know we can trust those two results and the relationship we built on based on these two numbers? So we added a calculation of annual net community production to test our estimates. So basically, it is calculated from the oxygen consumption in the region below the mixed layer and above 1,000 meter, followed Su et al. We integrate the oxygen profiles from the BGC-Argo to calculate the oxygen consumption amounts in each meter within that source box, and use the respiration ratio to determine the amount of carbon that is required to support this respiration. So this is basically a double check of POC exports from a second proxy, but based on the same platform. And it turns out that the ANCP estimate is about 50 grams per square meter per year. So that is a bit higher than the sum of the gravitational pump and the mixed layer pump, but it still agree with the error bars. So in the bar chart, the blue bar indicates the carbon pump exports, and the purple is the ANCP, and the dark gray is the sediment trap flux. And the other three, just the proportion in the growing season, which is the months from September to April. So both of the BBP and the oxygen estimates have a very similar proportion in the growing season to the annual mean. So that gives us a quite good confidence that we can trust the BBP estimates and the transfer efficiency we got. The discrepancy between the ANCP and the BBP estimates may suggest there are more carbon export pathways out there to complete these carbon budgets, but that might be beyond the BGC-Argo's capability. Thus, we just apply this estimates method to a border Australian sector of the Subantarctic Zone that is from 135 to 150 degrees east, including 1,200 profiles. And we extend this bar chart with another group of subantarctic sector. So you can see that both estimates have a very good agreement in two regions. And there is one more figure I didn't show here, but the seasonality and the magnitude of those carbon pumps in the Subantarctic Zone sector is very similar to what we have in the South region. So we believe that the South Marine has well represented the border region in terms of the magnitude and the seasonality of carbon export and the consumption of PLC in the mid-ocean and the carbon sequestration in the deep ocean. And by applying the transfer efficiency to the export flux in the Subantarctic Zone, we estimate that there are about a million tons of PLC will be stored in this section. Here is a quick summary of this study. So this is the first study to rigorously combine the estimate of organic carbon export based on biooptical and oxygen sensors and combine them within co-located deep sea sediment trap flux record. And we find that the gravitational pump dominate the magnitude and the seasonality of carbon export and also the carbon sequestration. And the mixed layer pump also contribute quite many exports during the mixing layer seasonal showing. And the BGC-Argo is probably not the best tool to observe or estimate the anti-subduction pump, but based on the sporadic exports, we believe that they are contribute quite strong and able to deliver the particle to the very deep ocean with a very high transfer efficiency. This problem can probably better addressed by the glider observations. The Andy Thompson's group in Caltech have observed more obvious and stronger eddy subduction event in the same region. And the overall transfer efficiency in the South region is about 3 to 4%, and the South Marine just represent very well for the border Australian sector of the Subantarctic Zone. I think this is pretty much all I have for this talk, and I like to end this talk with this schematic and with some take-home messages. Well, thanks for listening. I'm happy for any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Xiang. Does anyone have any questions? That's very interesting. No? Okay, I have a question. So I haven't worked with BGC-Argo data before, and I just wonder where do you draw the line between the larger particles that you use to calculate the BGC versus the smaller particles for the MLP? And do you have any issues with potentially double accounting?
You mean when I partition the particle into the large particle and small particles?
Yeah. And
well,
where did
essentially we just we separate the BBP numbers into in two groups. So they are, I think they don't have the issue with double counting.
Right. Okay. So you're using the same for every profile.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that just the smaller particles, you're imagining that they're just not large enough to sink. Yeah. So therefore they would have had to have been transferred. Okay, great. Thank you for clearing that up.
This is Ibin. Can I ask two questions?
What?
Okay. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, very fascinating talks. I really enjoyed it. I have two questions. So for the first question is regarding the depth that you use to quantify the gravitational pull. I probably missed something at your talk. Do you mainly look at the depth of the Subantarctic zone or the deep winter mist layer depth? My second question is regarding the seasonal variation of the transfer efficiency. If I remember your result correctly, it looked like the transfer efficiency peak in the fall and winter season when it's less productivity. I'm quite surprising to this result. Do you have any explanation on this evolution?
Okay, for the first question, the interface I use to calculate the export is basically just this mixing layer, which calculate at the maximum vertical gradient of the chlorophyll profiles. So I think it's more shallower in the summer and deeper in the winter. So it's not a fixed depth, if that's your question.
Yes.
Okay, for the second question, the transfer efficiency. So so this purple line is the FPOG climatology from the sediment trap. So it's basically quite stable if you and the bar chart is the BGC-Argo estimates surface export. So they are changing way more faster than the FPOG. So when the surface exports just suddenly shut down after the growing season, the transfer efficiency will just like shoot off. So that is basically why they are peaking around in the low productivity period.
Yeah, but what happened between the July and August is pretty high during the winter season, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking whether this is because you are mainly look at the depth of the missing depth. So during the winter season, the missing depths are pretty deep. So that means the distance between the up layer and 1,000 meter are more small compared to the summer season. Do you think this is the possibility that result in relative transfer efficiency in this period?
It could be one of the reasons, but I feel like the more possible reason is because the surface export is it's just a quickly shut down, so it changed the number to a very high ratio. But during the high productivity season, the mixing layer is obviously very shallow to the surface, so there is more distance for the particle that they need to travel to arrive to the deep ocean.
Okay, thanks. Very great talk again.
Thank you.
Great. And we had a question from Scott, but yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, my question was around the transfer efficiency and the seasonality of it. So yeah, you answered that question very well. But equally, given that you've got that the occurrence of the gravitational pump being exaggerated in those the sort of spring through to summer period, it's interesting that the transfer efficiency is moderately low compared to the winter, autumn and winter period. I'm just wondering if you would like to talk. Could you discuss any mechanisms along those lines? Is it tied up with the marine aggregate formation or any of those other sorts of processes?
Well, so I'm not sure if this bar chart can address your question. So this green bar here is the ANCP, which basically the oxygen consumption in the spring in September to April. So that is basically 70% of the annual mean. So I think in the growing season, the gravitational pump or mixed layer pump, they export a lot of carbon, but they are consumed a lot when the particle is traveling down to the deep ocean.
So do you think there's other processes mediating that, like the zooplankton or the bacterial remineralization that might be going on? I mean, are you talking about large particles settling out faster, or is it dominated by these slower sinking particles maybe?
Yeah. I think the remineralization is obvious. For sure it's there to sort of reduce the transfer efficiency in the growing season. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Xiang. If anyone has any further questions, perhaps both our speakers can pop your emails in the chat. But yeah, without further ado, we might move on to Denise for our next presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.